For this exercise, we're going to build a simple graphical user interface to perform temperature conversions from Celsius to Fahrenheit. We're going to use a grid layout instead of the flow layout to demonstrate how you can line up widgets to some extent. It's not perfect, and it still leaves you a somewhat clunky interface, but it is better than the flow layout manager. So let's start the program. We're going to call it tempconverter.java. First thing we need to do is import the different classes, so be patient with me while I do that. Now we're ready to start the program. First thing we need to do is declare the different objects, variables, and things we're going to use. So we're going to have two labels. I'll explain what they are for in a moment. We'll have one text field, one button, one string array to store the two possible temperature scales, Fahrenheit or Celsius, a list box to display the two temperature scales, and a variable temp index which will be used to get the selection out of the list. Next, we're going to have a function, convert, that takes a temperature and a scale and performs the specified conversion. So we check to see what scale equals, and then we perform the conversion that is called for. So here we're converting Fahrenheit to Celsius. Otherwise, we convert Celsius to Fahrenheit. Now we're ready to write the constructor for our class. So here we instantiate all of our objects. This is a label that will go by the text field to enter the temperature. Out label will be used to store the converted temperature, so it's going to be empty to start with. Our text field only needs 5 places to be able to store a temperature, which is probably not going to be more than 3 places long. We'll have a button the user clicks to begin the conversion. Temps is our array for storing the two possible temperature scales, Celsius or Fahrenheit. And then we have our list, which is made up of the two temps. Next, we instantiate our frame. Here we're going to set the layout to a grid layout. And the argument for the grid layout is going to be the number of rows and columns. Now there are other arguments, but we're only going to go with the row-column argument. Next, we're going to set the size. And we set our default close operation as usual. Skip a space, because the next thing we're going to do is create our listeners. First, we'll do our list listener or list selection listener. And for value changed, we're simply going to get the selected index and store it in our temp index variable. So that action is fairly simple. Next, we have our action listener for our button. And for the action performed method, we're going to create a variable temp that will consist of the value entered into the text field. So notice that we have to get the value from text field, convert it to integer using parseInt, then store it in the variable. So that's a little bit different than what you're used to. And we have to get the proper scale from the temps array, so that's our next step. And then the rest of the action in the program is right here where we set the text of the label by calling the convert function with temp and scale, just like so. So we close the definition for action performed, and then close out the Add Action Listener. Now all we have to do is add our widgets to the frame, paying attention to the order that they're added. You'll see why in a moment. Now we make the frame visible. And there we go. Last step. Then call the constructor for the class. Close the run method. Close invoke later. Close main, and then close the class. There we go. So let's save. Cross our fingers we typed everything in correctly. Got it. So let's run the program. Let me put the interface in the screen. So like I said, it's not a perfect interface. Our label is very boxy, but here's what we have. We have our temperature label. Here's our text field. This is our list, and here's our button. This is our out label to display the result. So if I type in 32 Fahrenheit and click Celsius and convert, I'll get 0.0. If I turn around and write 100, go to Fahrenheit and click convert, I'll get 212. So if I type 0 and stay at Fahrenheit, it'll give me 32. So those are the conversions that I'm familiar with, going from freezing point to boiling and boiling back to freezing. So this is not an ideal interface. You certainly would not want to publish this as any type of program for the public, but it gives you an idea of what you can do. Using a modern integrated development environment such as Eclipse, which we'll cover later, you can create a much more professional looking GUI than what we've done here. But what I wanted to show you was a different method for creating the graphical user interface using the grid layout instead of the flow layout manager. So hopefully you've gained something from this exercise. You've certainly seen some of the things you have to deal with, such as converting data from one type to another to get it into a text box or to get it out of a text box. And those are the kinds of things you have to work with when you're working with a graphical user interface in a quote-unquote real-world program. But with that, we're going to wrap up this exercise, and that wraps up this chapter on graphical user interface programming using Swing.